Quad C6. So I put a little bit of time to get a tune on this build I've been flying a lot lately. So this is that 1104 build that I did the last video on. So it's 1104s, and I think these are like a 7,500 kV, somewhere in that range. And I think anything up to like a 10,000 kV will work with this particular tune. I'm flying on the Emax Avan Rush props, so they're a 2.5 inch prop. A little bit more pitch than like the Gemfan 2512s, and a nice durable prop. Reasonable consistency on the balance and stuff like that. I've got it built up with an older board. It's a Flywoo F411, but I don't think that's going to make a huge difference between F411 or one of the newer boards with like an F405. I've got it built up with Express LRS, and I've been flying this 2S on a variety of batteries here. So I've got the heaviest that I'm flying it on that I wouldn't recommend going past this. This is the R-Line of 550, and this is like a 32 gram 2S battery. The other two batteries I've been flying on I like a little bit better just because the weight's a little bit lower, is the G&B Yellow Label 530s, which is a 90C, and as far as I can tell, these are basically the same as the Pink Label 450s. And then these new batteries, these are the G&B 550s relabeled by Race Day Quads, and it's 100C, so this is the red label. And as far as I can tell, this is the same exact size as the old 525 Pink Label. And these are about 29 grams, it's about 26 grams. I think either of these packs are preferred. I kind of like it, although slightly shorter flight time, I like it on the lightest pack. In terms of all-up weight, so this build here is 55 grams. So when we're adding, basically like a 30 gram pack, then we're at 85 grams. Obviously, slightly lighter pack is going to be slightly lighter, and heavier pack is going to be a little bit heavier. So basically we're talking around about an 85 gram all-up weight. And I just wanted to kind of show you the build real quick, and now let's get into what I put in the tune, and the preset is available for you so that you can try that out for yourself. Alright, so we're on the computer now. I've got the quad plugged in and we're looking in Betaflight. So this is up on the presets tab. If you want to use my presets, then what you need to do is go and add my URL and GitHub branch into your sources. And if you're not familiar with all of this side of it, I've got a link to a video I did below on using presets and getting my stuff so that you can use it on your own quads. Once you're in there, then you'll want to do a couple things. One is you want to go ahead, if you want to use my presets, go ahead and select Quad 66. That way you'll only see what I've uploaded. And I don't have a ton of stuff, so you don't really need to filter any further. But you can see I have some things like a 411 base setup. I've also got a recommended filter preset or RC Link preset for Express LRS, 500 Hertz. I've also got some filtering stuff in here too. But in terms of this particular tune, the one you want to grab is this one right here. So this is a 2S 2.5 inch tune for the 1104 motors. And as I said, the all-up weight is somewhere in that kind of 80 to 85 gram all-up weight range. I do have this on 48 kilohertz, so you do want to be on 48 kilohertz to be able to use this, because that PWM frequency is going to affect what you need to do in terms of the tune. If you want to take a look at this before you throw it on your quad, which is always a good idea, you can scroll through here on the CLI. But I'm going to go ahead and show you in Betaflight itself, because I think it's just a little bit easier to look at stuff. In terms of the tune, nothing crazy about this one. So one of the things I'm doing is I do have some particular settings on my feed forward, and so I've got jitter reduction of 5, smoothness of 50, 2-point averaging. You can see the boost and the max rate limit there. Another thing I am doing is I do use some, where is it? So I definitely use the VBAT sag compensation. I think everybody wants to use this, and I look at it at 100%. Gives you a nice linear feel across the range of the battery. I'm using a little bit of thrust linearization, nothing crazy, 20%. And I think the TPA I left at, yeah, they're just the stock settings here, TPA of 0.65 and a breakpoint of 1350. So that's just kind of the stock Betaflight TPA. Then in terms of where I ended up with these numbers, so the gains in general are just up a little, pushed up a little bit from like Betaflight defaults, but nothing crazy for the stuff that we're used to seeing with micros. You can see my P's at around 65, 66, D's of about 50, and feed forward just under 220 or so. The way I got there is on the sliders. I like using the sliders so that you can kind of easily manipulate these things a little bit rather than having to punch in numbers. The one challenge about the sliders is you can get to these relative numbers with some different settings. And so overall what you can see from the sliders though is I've got the master gain up to 1.4. So in general we're using higher gains across the board. And in terms of the balance between the different gains, what you can see is that we're using a little bit more feed forward. Compare 1.3 to the PNI. See, the PNI is only at 1.5, and then the Ds are kind of splitting the difference. So in general, compared to Betaflight defaults, I'm using definitely more feed forward and a little bit more D than the PNI in terms of the proportions. So pretty straightforward stuff there. Filters, I'm basically using my my aggressive filter tune strategy with one little difference, and I'll show you why when we get into the black box. But what I did is I actually put a D-term static notch on there because I was getting a little bit of a peak, and pulled back on one of my dynamic notches. I've kind of found these dynamic notches are great, but if you have a very clear peak, you're better off using the dynamic notch. And this really kind of, I'll show you in the black box why it's so good to have black box on your quad so you can take a look and do these little things. So this, by the way, I only needed to do this after I dinged up the motors. So the reason I was getting a little bit of a resonance was because I beat up the motor a little bit, and so they're a little bit out of balance now. It was buttery smooth before that, and I didn't need to worry about any of this. So how does this tune look? So I've got some black box here from Flight with this tune, and this is, I've kind of been working on how to visualize this most efficiently, and this is the setup I've been using, I think, which really works well for me to very efficiently see what the quad is doing and look at it all in just one kind of data stream and not have to flip between tabs. And so the way I've done this is I've got my gyro roll and my gyro pitch, and then I've got my set point roll and set point pinch, and so that really shows me how the quad gyro, the quad gyro is tracking the set point in both the roll and pitch axes. So here's my roll is going to be in yellow and red, and then my pitch over here in the purple and blue, and you can see both of these are going to be snap rolls. And then I do also add on, so I can look at noise at the same time, I look at my D on roll and D on pitch. Now when you're doing your first filter setup, you do want to actually go ahead and do a straight, like what I call a kind of noise panel, where you have your gyro scaled. But in this case, once we're pretty done with setting up the filters, then this is plenty to see what's going on. So now what you're looking at, what you want to see is a couple of things, key areas. So overall, yeah, you just want to scan through and you want to see how tight is your gyro following to your set point. That's the general gist of what you want to see. But you want to look at a couple of key points, and I think those key points to look at, I'll kind of show you right here. So when you're assessing how good is my tune, one of the first things I look for, well, you can kind of start anywhere because you have to kind of do a couple of cycles going through everything. But one of the first places I kind of look at is what are we doing here when we're initiating the move. So right here, it's a little subtle, but you can see the gyro roll there and the set point there. This is where your feed forward really comes into play. So that balance between feed forward and PNI, PI and D, this is really where it's happening, is at the initiation of your moves. And so if there's a big gap here, so if it's taken for a while for the gyro to jump onto the set point, that means your feed forward is low in proportion to your other PID gains. Then what you want to see is that you come all the way up. If you're getting up to this area of the snap roll, so this is basically just a snap roll commanded here where the quad is accelerating, getting up to full rate roll, and then decelerating the roll. And so when we're up here, we'll look for a couple things. If this, if the gyro is kind of getting a little bit laggy in terms of jumping on to finishing up here, that's often because your P is a little bit too low or your D is a little high. So your feed forward kind of starts this and gets it really close, and then your P is going to come in and finish this. And then up here, you can see that there's a little bit of wobble, but that's pretty straight across. This is where your P and D really come into play to hold it tight on that roll. If you see fast oscillations here, that's going to tell you that you don't have enough D, too much P. If you see a big spike like if the gyro comes and spikes past this and then comes down, that can be either, if it's all from the feed forward, it could be from the feed forward, but it can also be from the P kind of coming in. But this is another good place to look and see if this is really sloppy through here. Just in general, that means your gains are too low. That means your P and D are too low if this is really sloppy. And then another place to look is on when you're decelerating this roll. So in this case, this is never going to look as perfect as the start of the roll. It's just harder to rest the quad. But again, here you want to look at, is your feed forward able to get this gyro back onto the set point? And then down here, this is really your P and your D kind of balancing out and keeping things in. You do want to look at both these full snap rolls, and you also want to look at your twitch moves too. So these are little twitches here, and to me these twitches kind of bring out these same concepts, but in a little bit different way. So on the twitch moves, this is where I look for if I'm getting too much feed forward. So what I want to see is that my gyro just barely starts to get ahead of my set point, right in the middle of the twitch move here, because when you have too much feed forward, this is basically going to jump up too far. And then over at the top, right up here, this is all your P and D. So if your P and D is too low, this is why you get these little, it kind of loses the top here. So big things when you're looking at these twitch moves. If this is sloppy up here, that's more that you need more P and D. If this is jumping up too high here, that's too much feed forward. If it's not quite on there, that's going to be not enough feed forward. Now, if you're looking at that and you're kind of paying attention, you can see that I'm not perfect up here. And the question is, okay, well, if I'm saying that this is just a matter of adding more, so I think I have plenty of feed forward, you can see it just barely edging across here. See how this gyro is just leading the set point a tiny bit? That means I'm right on the max of the feed forward, and it's a relative thing. It's feed forward relative to the D. But if I'm saying that I can clean this up just by adding P and D, so the top of this twitch move here, so where you're changing kind of direction of the twitch, if I can clean this up just by adding P and D, why don't I do that? Well, the reason for that is because of all this D-term noise. So basically, as you increase your P and D, you're going to get much more of this noise. And you can see this is all stuff you don't want. So this D term is sensitive to the noise, and we're getting all these little like oscillations in here. And although you don't really necessarily feel this, especially on these micros, you don't get that. I don't get the grinding that you can with bigger motors. But on the micros, this just turns into heat and loss of efficiency. And so basically, you want to kind of keep this in check. You don't want to get in. You don't want to let it get too crazy, where you're getting a ton of these kind of D term. I call them little blooms. It seems like the noise just kind of blooms up. So to me, this looks like a pretty reasonable balance between this signal, which is my set point, and the noise. Maybe occasionally, sometimes I'm getting more noise than I want, but overall, I think that this looks reasonable. Now, going back into I had kind of mentioned that I changed up the filtering strategy here a little bit. And the reason for that is, so this is, I'm just looking at my D-term on roll. The reason for that was I was getting a really big peak. It wasn't really big, but it was a pretty noticeable that I was getting a peak right at this. This was like at 250, about 250 hertz. I was getting a peak here, and the rest of it, you can see, it looks fine. There's not much, you know, this noise otherwise looks pretty good here. And so let's raise this up a little bit so it looks more impressive. Okay, now my noise looks more impressive. But anyways, I was getting a clear peak here, and the rest of the floor looked pretty good. So rather than having the dynamic notch, trying to chase that around, I just went ahead and put the static notch on there. And what's interesting is when you really kind of put a notch on that center of the noise, the peak of the noise, it actually does a pretty good job also bringing the rest of the noise down. And so when I just slap that little notch on there, you can see it right in there. All this noise around it also kind of came down too. So, and as I said, I didn't need to do this before. Like when I had brand new motors on it, it was fine. But after I dinged up the motors, I was getting a little bit of that resonance. And fortunately, the noise where that resonance occurred too is 250, where it's really easy to put a notch on there without a ton of penalty in terms of you know, delay caused by the caused by the filtering. If you have a notch down here, down low, you know, in the 100 hertz range or something, then you're kind of in trouble, because you start putting filtering down here, it's going to cause you problems, a lot of problems with delay. In terms of our other plot here, so now when we go to this waterfall plot, you can see how that that notch really comes in there. And so this notch was in our motor band. This is kind of our first harmonic motor band. But it was right in there, and you can see how that notch is really taking out that particular noise band. One of the other things to think about too when you're putting in your static notches is that they kind of have an interesting property where although the notch is kind of like this perfect V shape, as you go up it becomes more effective. So what I tend to do to get the notch like right in the middle, because the peak isn't one linear line up and down, it's kind of like it builds, it's sort of a, you know, like a mountain. And to get the notch centered in the mountain, to take off both, not just the peak but also the shoulders too, you actually want the notch to be a little bit lower than where the actual peak is, because it's not as effective down lower as it is up higher. And so you kind of need to scoot it down a little bit. You need to cheat a little bit downwards. And this is really helpful for having to be able to see this and do this. And this actually made a big difference in how the quad sounded and flew in terms of the noise and that little, you know, kind of mid-throttle, you know, resonance that I was getting. So, yeah, if you're not using black box, good idea to use it, because it can really help out the way your quad flies. But anyways, overall, I think, you know, we have a pretty nice tune here, and I'm happy with how it flies, and I'm satisfied to where this is a tune I'm perfectly happy to fly. You can always get these things a little bit better, but I'm happy with this one. All right, so, you know, if you want to check out the preset, please do go ahead and add my my GitHub URL and branch on there so you can take advantage of it. And then, you know, check out this preset, and also, you know, check out some of the other presets I have. All right, till next time, cheers.